I thought I'd share with you what's been on my mind lately about the importance of how we engage in the world in the process of creating high achievement. So much of what we've heard today is, of course, about the great challenges this nation and this world is facing. More about how we engage in that process of high achievement is what I've been reflecting on. It occurs to me that this generation of innovators, this generation of kind of change agents, the younger entrepreneurs that are here, are much more connected than I was at their age with what's happening in the world, the forces that are unfolding for us to deal with the most demanding challenges. What I've realized of late, after 27 years in the profession of arms and now in technology leading a business, is that the people that I'm dealing with, having achieved enormous things in the material world, in the material accomplishment sense, are still searching for the things that really bring their soul and the sense of nobility to their spirit. And so, in an effort to share with you and with others what I think is important about this journey, I'd like to offer two stories really from my life that have helped me understand why who it is we're becoming is as important as what we're achieving. In the background, the letters and the newspaper clippings are from a pretty important moment in my life when I was 8 years old, laying on the carpeted floor of a small apartment. My dad, famously frugal, thought that some scarcity in America would be good for his kids. My mom had brought out articles from the passing of her elder brother and wanted to share with her kids what had happened in that tender time in the early 1960s when her brother lost his life. Little did I know how much it would shape my life. I want to share with you how instrumental the power of thought is in understanding what I'm calling, when I speak to young entrepreneurs and innovators, the new wealth. And why do I call it the new wealth? Because I think for this generation, material achievement just won't be enough. The desire to have influence and impact on the highest stages with the greatest risk is also a nascent desire of everyone now who's in the arena and knows the challenges we're facing. And what I've discovered in my own life is it's not enough to have lived a life of high achievement. You have to have lived it in such a manner that the prerequisites, the nobility of spirit, the virtue of your life as a parent, the character that should be resident in each of us is manifest in the course of your life for you to be really relevant on those challenges. I like to think of this as internal disruption. External disruption is what everyone talks about when they want to achieve great things. They want to create a new market and be the gorilla in that market and just have some fantastic story of wealth and achievement. The internal disruption I think that we all need to be cognizant of has to do with challenging our own understanding of the mental framework that we bring to work each day so that we can strengthen and really improve ourselves individually. Who we're becoming is as important as what we're achieving. For me, that starts out with my uncle Ganeshan, seen here in the upper picture, just before his passing on a fateful day in March 12, 1961, flying out of an air station, Tambaram, just south of Chennai. He's flying on a training mission that day with his co-pilot, Ram Mohan, and having flown for 20 years, I can tell you every pilot's worst nightmare is kind of the shuddering of the engine or of your power plant to let you know that the airframe is not going to deliver the thrust that you need to stay airborne. On that particular day, on March 12th, Ganeshan was flying over the city of Chengalpet, just south of Mahabalipuram, when that exact scenario unfolded. He and his co-pilot Ram Mohan knew immediately what their training taught them to do, and that was that they needed to eject from the aircraft in order to live. This particular aircraft, the Harvard, had no recovery from crashing. The crash landing was not something that was taught. What was taught was to eject inside the envelope when an engine seized, and that's what they were preparing to do. And Ganeshan apparently realized that in releasing the controls to prepare for ejection, that aircraft would likely head straight into the village of Chengalpet, and that many people who were unsuspecting and thought the Indian Air Force was there to defend them would likely lose their lives. And he realized in that moment that there was no possibility of him leaving the aircraft with that outcome, that eventuality. He knew that by holding the controls in a certain way, that the aircraft in its rapid descent would continue to veer and perhaps impact the grounds to the south of the village. A little cashew grove is what he'd hoped. His co-pilot Ram Mohan wouldn't have anything of that. They discussed it at length as the plane was descending, rapidly approaching their minimum ejection altitude. Finally, Ganeshan ordered his co-pilot to eject, and Ram Mohan ejected. Ganeshan stayed with the aircraft, and it crashed. He lay there mortally wounded as the villagers surrounded him. Aware enough to ask if Ram Mohan had lived in the descent, he was informed he had. And Ganeshan asked the villagers if anyone was harmed, if any villagers had been harmed, if any damage had been done to property, if any livestock had been lost. And they responded that they had not, that none of that had occurred, that the crash had taken place in this small cashew grove. And upon that, he breathed his last, according to the villagers, smiling, knowing that no one had been harmed. The letters and newspaper clippings you see in the background are what I read as an 8-year-old and it was all of the mythology of Amar Chitra Khan and the Marvel and DC Comics. It was all that I could do to bring that young uncle of mine to life, flying around that little apartment, imagining myself over Chengalpet. The power of my association with him was so great. 35 years later to the day of his passing, I roared over that village in an Indian Air Force jet as the first American Air Force pilot on exchange to the Indian Air Force at the beginning of our defense relationship. All the little decisions that I had made through the course of my life with this underlying framework in mind brought me to that moment. Only possible, by the way, if you grow up in a great democratic republic like this nation and the United States of America. That's a picture of the President of India awarding the Ashok Chakra for valor, otherwise than in the face of the enemy, to Ganeshan. And I realized, looking back on this series of events, that the story of Ganeshan's life, characterized here in letters and in articles of heroism and selflessness, was more about the manner in which he'd lived his life. I'd often wondered when I went into the profession of arms whether in the face of the enemy I'd have the courage to act as my uncle had. And what I realized, and what I'd like to connect to now, this definition of the new wealth, is that in the small decisions Ganeshan had made growing up, he was quietly reinforcing the very values that he knew, so that in his moment of greatest peril, his character, his courage would be manifest. And in the absence of the nourishment of those values, with values in tension, we often don't act as our best selves. And it reminded me of the importance of anchoring myself in those values in the course of my profession. The second story I want to share with you just briefly about creating this sense of accomplishment, of deep professional satisfaction and a fulfilling life in the course of high achievement comes from my wife's grandfather, maternal grandfather, Franklin de la Pia, who just passed a few months ago. Here he is as a 17-year-old, just arrived in America, an immigrant from Italy. His father was a cobbler, and so he joined the United States Navy in the great campaign of our time in World War II and was a cobbler on board ship in the Pacific. 45 years at General Motors, retiring at the peak of his domain. He put on the cap, you see him here, at age 85, and for 20 years wore his association in World War II and Korea, his service to the nation, as the defining characteristics of his life. In other words, looking backwards, he had defined his contributions by the time that he was involved with something greater than himself, by the character, courage, and sacrifice of the people that he'd been around. None of the accomplishments in the course of those 40 years at GM as an Italian-American growing up in a very difficult period in America had any relevance to him in his transition years. In dealing with him in his last few years, I realized how important it is for us to kind of, even in the course of high achievement, begin with the end in mind. We often say, I'm about to take my team off to a strategic offsite in business. We're touching $100 million in revenue, enormous capabilities ahead of us, hiring, tremendous leadership opportunities, and we're going to talk about the end in mind. In this case, I'm talking about the end being in your mind, in my mind, the kind of person we'd like to be at the end of our period of high achievement, and whether or not we had adequately protected the very things that we can't buy with material achievement in the course of that journey. My own conclusion is that it's in the way that you approach life, it's in the way that you live your life day to day that determines whether you'll have that sense of fulfillment, that sense of character that gives you the influence and impact of the new wealth. For me, high influence and impact comes to the way you've lived. I have these two pictures here. It's just a concluding thought with you about my time in Afghanistan, leading forces against the enemy that this nation has faced and my nation has faced. Extremism and terrorism, which is a scourge the world over, certainly for republics and free people. The children you see in that picture, of course, are the greatest hope. You might immediately recognize that they're studying in a liberal education, and that may be the best defense against extremism. The picture beneath it there is a number of hurricanes in 2005 that came upon from what we call Hurricane Alley, the Caribbean, up into Florida. My family's living just in the shadow of that one. That happens to be the picture of Katrina, which devastated the southern states in America that year. It reminds me and reminded my family that the time to prepare for this kind of event in your life is before the event occurs. Why Ganeshan was able to make the decision he did at the time he did was because all his life he had reinforced the integrity, the selflessness, the compassion, the empathy, the values that he knew he would need so that he could make the right decision. Had he not taken the time in the daily course of his life to reinforce those values in his decisions, his character wouldn't have been, his courage wouldn't have risen. I think, as I reflect on it now, it's important not just for the young entrepreneurs and innovators to think about the manner in which they're living their life during this course of high achievement, but also for those who have moments of reflection in transition to challenge the mental frameworks and mental habit patterns that you develop over time. Just as now, if you read the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible, you read it differently as the years and experience and knowledge pass. The words haven't changed. Your understanding of them have changed. Even now, you can challenge the mental frameworks that you have to make sure that you're living by the values that you know will bring you joy and fulfillment as life unfolds. The United States, like India, I think, is filled with monuments to people who've given their all to causes greater than their own personal self-interest, greater than their own self-aggrandizement. So while I'm moved by the idea of taking on a great challenge, I'm more moved by the manner in which we engage with the world to demonstrate the values that we know are transcendent. So that at the end of that journey, you can look back, as I'm transitioning now, reflecting on the sense of courage and character that will give you the influence, along with high achievement, to be at the table when the greatest challenges are discussed. The sense of respect that you command comes from as much how you lived as much from what you've achieved. Thank you for your time today.